Oh. Today we're talking colour grading. Today we're going to be talking about colour grading, and I'm going to show you how you can get your projects from looking like this to looking like this. So the first thing you need to know ideally is that there is a difference between colour correcting and colour grading. Generally, colour grading is what happens after you've corrected your colour, and correcting colour is essentially just making sure that all of the exposure levels and the brightnesses, darknesses, blacks, whites, shadows, midtones, etc. all look nice. And essentially colour grading is where you get all the colours to pop and you give them that lovely, nice filmic look. Now, there are so many different ways to actually colour correct and colour grade. I've seen people colour correct with the lumetri scopes, I've seen people colour correct with the sliders, I've seen them use different third-party plugins, I've also seen them use curves. Everybody has a different style and a different way of doing things. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into Premiere Pro and we're just going to have a look at my personal workflow. So let's go. What you want to really do is look through the clips that obviously once you've got your sequence arranged already, you want to look through each individual clip and just make sure that the contrast, the whites, the blacks, etc. are all where they need to be. So there's no harm in making sure that this is good whilst you're shooting. So for example, when you look at the light spectrums on your camera, you'll see that there's numbers and then there's what looks like a little bar going across the bottom. Now, when it comes to looking at the bar across the bottom, that is basically showing you how much light is going into the camera and whether it is well exposed or whether it's underexposed or whether it's overexposed. So this is when it comes to manual shooting, you'll generally tend to mess around with your ISO, your aperture and your shutter speed in order to make sure this is right in the middle of where it needs to be. Once you're actually in Premiere Pro, you head up to the colour panel. Once you've got your sequence there, we'll just ignore this for the time being. I'll show you what those are in a minute. So this is actually a project I'm working on currently for a friend of mine who owns an American football store, and basically we're doing like a cool little motivational of one of the top players on the team. So we jump into lumetri colour, and first things first, you can see there's a difference here between, it's ever so slight of a difference. So we're underexposed and then we've just corrected that colour ever so slightly. And how we do this is simply by going through the exposure, the whites, the contrast, the blacks, etc. using our lumetri scopes. Now our lumetri scopes here, you've got one for your colour, so you're basically able to see if there's so much of a certain colour bleeding into the image. So in this case we can see he's got the white and red trainers and the red gloves, so there seems to be an awful lot of red and a little bit of magenta in there. There's also a bit of blue which is being picked up because I just wanted to really deepen those blacks to make sure the socks are jet black, so it's a tiny bit of blue there as well. But what we're looking for at the moment is actually this side of things. So on your histogram you're able to see numbers from 0 up to 100. Now using the Ansel Adams zone system, this essentially shows you what you should really be looking for in an image. So 100 represents pure white and 0 represents pure blacks. This is user individual. This is individual to each user. So for example, with this image, you can see that there's lots of black in these jet black socks and there's also pure white on these trainers. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to chuck the exposure all the way up to 100, because as you can see, it blows out the sound completely. So what I aimed for here is I aimed to just bring my contrast down ever so slightly to the 0, because that'll bring the exposure down just so it doesn't tip over 0, or we'll keep that about 70, because in the Ansel zone systems you can see that that's about right for natural light. With the blacks, we don't want to bump them up too much, we just want to keep them, that's about right. And then the rest is just to add a bit more white in there, a bit more brightness, or add a bit more darkness in there too. And your contrast will just give the overall contrast a bit of a boost. So your dark areas will go darker, your light areas will go lighter. So if we have a look at the little before and after, you'll be able to, I don't know why I've got a second lumetri there, so we'll see that that's not corrected, that is corrected. So when you go through all your individual clips, you'll be able to see, again, this one. Okay, so you've got those 3 small clips. So you've got a running clip, you've got the catch, and you've got the second clip. Again, these haven't had any sort of colour work done on them yet, so if we just knock on the colour correction, sorry, you will be able to see again that we've just done some ever so slight tweaks to bring the whites up to about 70 and the blacks as far down as we can to 0 without actually blowing them out. Trouble is with things like this, if we just zoom in on, just lock those for a moment, zoom in here, and I'll show you what happens if we knock the blacks all the way down to 0. You can see just in this area that the blacks seem to get a little bit too saturated, so they start looking pixelated and a bit too saturated, so we don't actually want that. Now, once you've gone through all of your individual colours and your individual scenes, you've actually corrected the colour, so it's okay on the histograms, and it's also very well exposed, so we'll just knock all of these back on. Fantastic. So we've got the different colours here. What we want to do now is we want to look at our colour grading. Now, colour grading gives you the different type of looks that you might find in films. So for example, you've got the orange and teal look, which is very widely used in films. You've also got like the cold look of countries such as like Russia and Serbia, and then you've got the typical California Gold Coast look, which is very vibrant and gold. This is done with your creative tab. So all you want to do is make sure you're in the colour panel, get your clips and head over to the colour tab. Now, what I would highly recommend here is not actually directly colour grading onto the clip, because what you'll see that happens is your computer may blow up. So what I like to do is I like to put an adjustment layer in, and if you don't know how to add an adjustment layer, all you do is you head to your media browser here, and then right click, you'll see new item, new adjustment layer, and then you can pop a little adjustment layer with your time base, your pixel ratio, and here we're 3480 by 2160 because we shot this in 4K. Once you're in the colour grade, I'll show you what it looks like before the grade and then after. So you can see here that there's a much deeper mood going on. So you've got like a nice golden sand, you've got a bit of blues coming out in the clouds, and then you've also got that nice lovely cinematic look, which just makes it look badass in my opinion. So we'll knock that off for the time being, and you can see a massive difference there. So what I did with this colour grade is I actually used a LUT. Now this LUT is one that I, as part of a course that I bought, I actually bought this called, it's the Avium LUT. Now what I wouldn't advise doing with any LUTs is just slapping them on and then, you know, deciding that looks good, because most, you know, quite possibly it actually doesn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I mean. Let's say, for example, if we were to put on the gold tobacco LUT, and we'll boost the intensity up to 100%. So here you'll be able to see that, yeah, although it looks okay, you know, you've pretty much just put a filter on there, so it can sometimes overexpose. So you can see that we've got like loads of gold in, the clouds are no longer white, and even there the clouds aren't white. There's other ones as well, so red wave, for example, knock it black and white, or you've got like HDR, which will completely blow it out altogether. So what we want to do is we want to actually play around with the LUTs, and you want to really tailor it to your own taste. So you can get some really good ones online. You know, Peter McKinnon, Matti Heopa, they all have really good LUTs on offer. So with the Avium LUT, generally speaking, the curves, I don't tend to correct with curves. I normally just tend to correct with like midtones, the shadows, the highlights, and then just mess around with some of the colours. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this actually was a LUT that I banged on myself and just played around with the intensity, purely because I didn't think it was going to need much like afterwards. It looked really good as it was. So let's move these up, and I will try my best to grade it from scratch to the same colour. Wish me luck. Okay. So we'll get rid of this. And the first thing I'd normally do when it comes to colour grading is I'd always go for a curve. Now, like I said earlier, people tend to do this differently. It doesn't matter where they go, you're always going to find that people grade differently. I like to typically use a S-curve. So I'll put 3 points on my RGB curves, just this white RGB curve, and I'll generally tend to bring that down, leave that where it is, and to boost up my highlights a little bit. And what you'll see here is it starts to form an S, and even if we just go before and after, you can see that that's brought a lot of vibrance into the colour. So it's sort of knocked those blacks down, it's brought those whites up, and it looks quite nice. With the shadows, I'll generally see where I'm sitting on the actual scopes. So here we can see that there's a little bit of cyan and blue leaking into the image, but by the looks of it, the sky is far too blown out. And again, similar sort of picture here. There's so many whites in there, and there's a lot of blue and a little bit of yellow from the sand. So we try and counteract those. So let's have a look at the hue versus hue. Again, make a few points. And you can see here that when I'm actually messing around with the hues, it's ever so slightly changing the colour over in the colour scope here. So I want to try and keep that as, that looks good. And I want to just bring those blues out ever so slightly. So we'll just knock those blues. No, I like it a bit deeper, so we'll keep those blues there. Fantastic. What I also generally tend to do is mess around with the shadows, the highlights and the mid-tones. So my highlights look quite blown out here, so I'm just going to move it ever so slightly and just get rid of the white, and I'm just going to add a little bit more yellow into my shadows. And then, to be fair, I don't think that looks too bad. I mean, you can see here that our quarterback's pasty white, the gloves are very red, so we might need to make a few different adjustments there. Down ever so slightly. I mean, I think that looks pretty good. No, I'm not a fan of that, that's far too a little bit blown out there. No, okay. So we'll see if we can, might have to do some ever so slight changes to the individual clips. The shadows down a bit, that looks pretty good. But you'll also find with your colour grade that it's very warm at the moment. So that's a good reference point. We'll just knock just a bit more on the wrong bloody one. We'll just stick a little bit more warmth into that. There we go, that looks nice. So let's watch it back with our, not the whole thing, you don't want to see that, you just want to see this bit. So let's have a look, let's watch it back. Our grades. Go. So it really all is a case of trial and error, to be honest. I mean, when it comes to colour grading and colour correcting, you might find that each clip might need ever so slight tweaks. It's very, very rare that you'll find, or you'll create a look, or you'll find a look that is like a one size fits all. I mean, for the project itself, I chose this one, so they're not entirely too dissimilar. So this is the one here that we've just done together, and then you've got the one that's actually on the video itself. So they look pretty good, they look pretty similar. And like I say, each one will need ever so slight adjustments, but you'll get where you want to be. And then all I tend to do after I've colour graded is I will stick some cine bars on, because, you know, looks ace. Pop a little watermark on. And there we have it. So I appreciate this video was probably a little bit of a bad explanation when it comes to colour grading, but you generally tend to get the idea behind it. And the important thing to realise is the differences between colour correction and colour grading, because they are completely different things. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, or if you want to drop me a follow on Facebook or Instagram, I'm DW Films Wigan on Facebook, and I'm _DW Films on Instagram. Or if you want to just stick around, like and subscribe on my channel, and then we'll be able to get some more. I'll be able to get some more tutorials out there and just generally show you my workflow when it comes to editing. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.